Welcome to the Water People podcast. I'm your host, Lauren Hill, and my co-host is Dave Rastovich. This season is supported by Patagonia, whose purpose-driven mission is to use business to save our home planet. We acknowledge the Bundjalung Nation, the first and ongoing custodians of the land and waters where we work and play, who have lived, worked, and cared for this sea country for tens of thousands of years. Respect and gratitude to all First Nations people who continue to practice the cultural, spiritual, and educational customs of their ancestors. Today, we're in conversation with waterwoman Karina Petroni. Karina was born and grew up in the Panama Canal Zone, but is known as one of Florida's prodigy surfers. In 2006, the New York Times called her one of the, quote, scions of Florida's recent surfing tradition. Karina's promise for professional surfing, combined with her family's investment in managing her career, was so great that she was earning a living from surfing as a 10-year-old. Karina competed on the World Championship Tour for more than a decade, holding the top spot on the leaderboard for a spell in 2008. And in 2009, Karina featured in the Academy Award-winning documentary The Cove. As her passion for competing waned in her early 20s and she started to come down from the high of being a teenage professional athlete, Karina discovered that her management had betrayed her and lost all of her assets. She had nothing material to show for her 14-year career. She had to start over completely. Karina now happily resides in the Caribbean with her husband Dave, where she manages rental properties, sails, surfs, freedives, and assists with marine salvage operations, which is where her story begins today. Before we get into chatting about Karina's story, I wanted to take a moment to explain why we haven't been releasing podcasts for the previous 2 to 3 months. We've been on the road showing a short film that I've made called The Physics of Nose Riding, but we were also visiting family in Florida. I hadn't been home in 3 years, so that was a really, massive, intense, beautiful experience to get to reunite with my family. And it was also a pretty tumultuous time because my parents both now have been through life-altering health challenges. And my dad in particular is, a completely different person from when we saw him last before this trip 3 years ago. He's had strokes on both sides of his brain. And so it was a really confronting experience, that first part of our 2-month trip. And my mom, maybe if you've been listening, since the beginning of Water People, you know that my mom went through a really traumatic health scare where she had her leg amputated and then ended up going through stage 4 cancer. And now miraculously, she is in remission, which is amazing. But she's really struggled to find her spark for life again. And she's struggled to really get out of bed for the last few years. And so it was also confronting to be there with her and to try to bring joy to a, kind of hopeless feeling situation. If you face the mortality of your parents, then this experience of so many complex emotions at the same time. The joy of having the time to be together. I didn't think that we would have that with my mom, but then also the sadness of mourning future dreams that I'd had for us and for our son, Manoa, with her. And it's complex. And so that set us up for a complex trip. And it was. And on top of that, we ended up getting so sick in our first few weeks in Florida, like proper lung infection, coughing more than I think either of us had ever really experienced before. And anyway, all this is to say that the podcast fell by the wayside a little bit. We always had it on our mind to be sitting down and recording, and we did get to do a little bit of that. But you'll hear in this recording with Karina that, we both sound a little bit stuffy. You can probably hear Manoa coughing in the background. We were just kind of trying to do our best to keep up with what life was handing us at the moment and to be present for the really intensely challenging experience of, walking with parents into maybe their final years, final months, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, and you did great with it, Lauren. It's not an easy path to walk, and all of us have a very unique experience of that. And you're an only child, and we're on the other side of the world. And I'm sure a lot of people can relate to that strange feeling of being stuck where you are over the last few COVID years, and friends or family needing perhaps your kind of help on the other side of the world and not being able to offer it. So there's a lot there for sure. And so that period also was a strange one for us, because we were leaving Australia, the east coast of Australia in particular, that has been under rain and flooding and still is the entire year of 2022. And so I have to acknowledge that for us, it was really exciting to be able to leave the area for a little while and try and dry our gills out and get the mold and the moisture out of our bodies. And that was pretty much building to a peak when we got to Florida, and we had to, take antibiotics and get through that lung infection thing and move on. And so I also acknowledged that when we were feeling that crook, really, we didn't want to sit with too many people and have conversations. We really didn't want to pass this funk on to anyone else. We already did that to your poor family when we got there. And so, we were prioritizing.
That was horrible too. We were kind of, right when we arrived, we were faced with a situation. We've been away. We haven't seen these people that we love for 3 years, and we're sick. Do we isolate from them for, a week of our 2-week stay, 10 days of our 2-week stay, or do we just expose them to it and try to recoup or, reconnect during that time? I bet a lot of people have faced that situation.
Yeah, for sure. And these are all such new experiences for us as global humans now. We have a relationship that spans the globe, you and I, and so many of us do. And especially in Australia, it's such a multicultural nation. There's so many crossed over stories and cultures and histories. And this is new territory, how to navigate it, how to do it right, and with love and kindness. And so I think at that point we were really trying to be our healthiest selves so we could be our most useful selves. And so, really sitting down, turning on the tech and recording conversations with people really did get swept aside, because we needed to sit in the sun and dry out, occasionally surf, see the closest family members that we'd gone that whole way to go and see, and then just try and fix our own systems. And what struck me as our travels continued, because once we left Florida, we went on to California and to the islands of Hawaii, was how similar that story was for people around the world, and maybe just around the Pacific and North America, in that people had recently lived through, hurricanes, double floods in Kauai, fires and floods in California, and, ecological upheaval, which of course affects us and our lives and our health. And that was really striking for me, was that we thought, here we are in our little bubble on the east coast of Australia, getting just absolutely washed away with these huge record-breaking rain levels. But then when you speak with friends who are also embedded in their ecology, surfers, divers, fishers, sailors, climbers, runners, they were saying pretty much the same things about their region over the last few years. And that's an interesting experience, and something that is, I think, very important to bring back to our community here. And that's why I'm bringing this up right now, is for us to realize that many of these systems that we're a part of, these ecological systems, are experiencing similar things right now and require our attention and require us to turn up in our healthiest, strongest selves, so we can look after each other when things go pear-shaped, or look after at least ourselves and our loved ones in our inner circle. So that's my take on why we didn't get to record and keep the rhythm going with the podcast.
And doesn't Karina echo that so beautifully in our conversation toward the end of this chat? She speaks to her challenge of the word selfish and how important she's found it as a former professional athlete, and now finding new ways to be in the world, how important it is for her to take care of her physical self, to do what some people would call, being selfish by taking good care of herself so she can take care of other people, so she can rise to the needs of an ailing parent and other loved ones. And that was one of the main takeaways of this conversation for me that I found really insightful and beautiful.
So wonderful. And it's great to hear about your Florida connection, the two of you, and how much of an early surf star Karina was, and how even though she was 12 or so and traveling the world already as a young professional surfer, you were seeing her, in these ads and photos and videos, and just in awe of this young girl who was so skilled in the water.
She really was.
And bold.
A surfing prodigy.
Yeah.
I mean, it's hard to overstate how pervasive her image was in surf media on the East Coast. And even though she's a few years younger than I am, she started surfing before I did. She started her surfing career really when she was 9 or 10, and then had this sort of illustrious run on the World Championship Tour. And she branched out into fashion and non-endemic brands in a way that was fairly new for the surf industry. And she really had big goals and a big vision for her surfing career that I think is really admirable. And then she speaks to how it kind of came crashing down around the age of 21. It was relatively short, but still kind of long, 14 years, but through her most formative years, through her entire teenage years. And so, I was just really curious to chat with her in depth about some of these issues that we've spoken a little bit about over the years, but we hadn't really taken the time as adults to sit down. And I just wanted to hear her talk story about all of these things from her perspective.
And so with all that in mind, it's really a pleasure for us to share this conversation with Karina Petroni. It's just great. She's such a live wire and such a fun, wonderfully strong presence. And she just doesn't take any shit, but she doesn't take it too seriously. And I feel like the young women coming into the surfing world these days could really do well to tune into what Karina has learned through her surfing life and her adventures in so many different avenues, her surfing and her trajectory to become the water woman that she is right now, which I think is a really fascinating and wonderful story. So I hope people enjoy it.
So, Karina, we begin these podcasts in the same place each time, and that's by asking about a time or experience after which you were never the same. Do you have a story like that you'd be willing to share?
Yes. I was in a helicopter in the Windward Passage in between Haiti and Cuba. And my husband, actually, I don't even know we were married at the time. My husband now, David, and I were in the helicopter, and our friend, his business partner, was flying the helicopter, and we landed on the northern tip of Haiti, and we had fuel strapped to the skids of the helicopter, which is really dangerous to fly with fuel strapped to the skids of a helicopter. Landed on the northern tip of Haiti to refuel the helicopter because we were kind of hopping down from the Bahamian archipelago of islands coming down, and the mission was to rescue a boat that had been abandoned in the Windward Passage. And the Windward Passage is a very congested shipping lane, mainly from ships coming from, the Gulf Stream and North America transiting to the Panama Canal and then onward to the Pacific. So it's quite the bottleneck right there. And so we landed on the northern tip of Haiti to refuel because we were going to run out of fuel. And then the funniest part about it was I was a vegan at the time, like a really hardcore vegan. And I didn't really know what was ahead of me or what lied ahead of me and what to anticipate. So I was stuffing like Amy's burritos down my wetsuit, sitting in the back of this helicopter, like stuffing carrots, all these random vegetables. Cause I'm like, shit, man, I don't know what's about to happen, but I think we're about to jump out of this helicopter and board this abandoned vessel that's been afloat. What they was drifting into Cuban waters. So once it gets into Cuban waters, kind of game over. So we take back off from Haiti, and that was an experience in itself. And because Haiti is it's unreal if you get a chance to see it. Bit sad, and then we get back in the helicopter and we have the coordinates of where the boat is, and we're hovering over this boat, and I'm sitting on the edge of this helicopter with burritos and carrots stuffed up my wetsuit, and I'm like, well, here it goes. And we jump out of this helicopter and we swim our asses over to this boat that's been adrift now for like a couple weeks. And typically, when a vessel or anything is adrift for a few weeks, you never know what's kind of lurking, below the surface. And we pull ourselves aboard this boat, and the helicopter flies away. And luckily we had a plane come by that was part of the same mission and throw us out like gallons of water and like sat phones and, VHFs and more burritos now. And then we pull ourselves aboard this boat, and it was a 12-day journey after that. But, it could go on for hours, but I think that was kind of a pivotal moment for me as far as kind of here goes nothing and a Hail Mary. And we have to get this boat back into Bahamian waters. And, the batteries were completely run dry. When they abandoned ship, they left everything on. The Haitians had come and stripped the boat. They pulled all the halyard lines and the sails, and we literally just made do with bare bones, got below deck, disconnected the plumbing to get water, and found spaghetti, found coffee, thank God. And and then that was it. And then just try to tack our way all the way back up to Inagua. And I think that after that was a big turning point for me as far as what you're capable of in really intense, stressful situations and not having any options. The only option was just to get out of the situation, make do, get back to a safe harbor. That was that. So.
Wow, that's amazing. Can you tell why were you doing this? Can you talk to us about why you were doing this?
Well, my husband was running a marine salvage company at the time that his parents had founded. So a business that was completely unknown to me before we met, and very, very non-conventional lifestyle as far as rescuing yachts and boats in distress. And I guess in a very simple way, you would be recognized as a fire truck on the water, so to speak, and not necessarily maybe aiding to the people. Maybe the Coast Guard does that, but you are there more to prevent the vessel from being a total loss, which in return typically saves an insurance company a lot of money from forking out their entire policy. So that is where you get paid. Right. This is a very interesting business, but you're on call 24/7. And sometimes, things are relatively easy, and other times you're jumping out of a helicopter. Yeah.
What interests me about that, Karina, is that experience does not enter your life at a point where you've been sitting on a couch watching TV your whole life before that.
No.
Before that, you've had a lot of adventures. And we've been together on some of those adventures. And you've been in the world-class surfing competition arena and sponsored surfer arena for a long time. Does that experience stand head and shoulders above all of those other ones in some way then? Because you would have had a lot of Hail Mary moments over the years in surfing, through surfing,
Yeah.
How does that differ?
I don't know if it completely differs because everything's relative and within context, right? So I think that I would never live a life away from the ocean now, especially, my gosh, it's hard for me not to go too far without being able just to see it, make sure it's still there, But how does it differ? I guess it differs because I was taken out of my comfort zone. And I think that maybe we all have different types of comfort zones, but it goes to show that the ocean as an entity can continuously teach you so many things. And there's so many layers within that you are constantly learning. So fortunately, to become a surfer and a water woman and a lover of the ocean and surround your life with that, I think prepared me for an event like that.
Karina, you mentioned that the marine salvage business was an unconventional way of life.
Yeah.
Unconventional ways of life maybe weren't so unfamiliar to you. Can you talk us through your childhood upbringing, where you were and what your formative experiences with the water were like?
Sure. I was born and raised in the Panama Canal Zone. It was the American jurisdiction within the country of Panama, which, I think is a necessary reference to know, because it's certainly different than growing up within the country of Panama, right? So, a lot of immigration officers, when I come to the United States, they ask me, well, how did you become an American, right? So I was born in the Canal Zone of Panama, which was an incredible upbringing. My dad went down there in the late 70s, and him and my mom went down there like, let's just try it for a year, let's see how it goes, and to become a Pan Canal pilot. And then they ended up staying for 23 years. And growing up in Panama was incredible. I was in the water, shortly after birth, and had a machete in my hand at 5, going through the jungle and adventuring and bass fishing in the lake. And I was there until I was about 13. So growing up within the jungles of Panama was unbelievable. And I think that was incredibly helpful for me to craft maybe who I am today, right? So I think that what you're exposed to at a young age, through pure immersion and being that sponge when you're young, preps you for maybe what's to come. So, yeah.
You have brothers and sisters.
I have 2 brothers and a sister. Yeah.
And what was your schooling experience like through those years?
Yeah, schooling was good. I went to, I was kind of in and out of school between, I guess, from preschool to 6th grade. I was in and out of school. And because by that time, when I started surfing at 9, I was in between Panama. My parents bought property in North Florida, Atlantic Beach, just north of here at Crescent. And then I started going to Australia by the time I was 9. Got residency down there somehow. Finagle that one. And then kind of just did between Australia, Panama, and Florida for a while. And then was in and out of school, doing a lot of homeschooling. And then 6th grade, I went full tilt homeschool until 10th grade. And chemistry and trigonometry came to the picture. My mom was like, see you later. And then I went and got the good enough diploma. Luckily I had a, full-fledged surfing career at that time. I was very blessed and fortunate to have an income from surfing at the time. So technically I had a job, so I didn't have to, proceed on to university at the time. So.
Wow.
You were, you still are, but when I was growing up on the East Coast of Florida here, you were traveling and having experiences that I couldn't yet even imagine, but you were one of the standout stars of surfing through my early surfing experiences. And I've just always admired your surfing so much.
Likewise.
And your kindness and your sense of adventure. It's just, inspired so many of us.
Oh,
yeah.
That's very sweet. Thank you.
Can you talk us through what those years were like as a competitive surfer coming from Florida? Yeah. Why does that matter? Why does coming from the East Coast matter in the context of the big scale of professional surfing, or does it?
I think it does. I guess times are changing now, but I'm very East Coast proud, very, Florida proud. I grew up watching, of course I grew up watching Tom Curran but grew up heavily watching, Floridian-based surfers, Frida Zamba, Lisa Anderson, Kelly, of course, the Hobgoods, the Lopez brothers. No, Floridians are scrappy. They're not picky. They keep it moving, so I think that there's something to be said for that. Right. And I realize once again that times are changing and the level is escalated so much that I'm not going to dive into that sector now, but I think that growing up in Florida, I think you can't be picky. You have to keep morale very high. and you just get out there and you just take what you can get. And I think that was able to prevail back in the day, right? And yes, Kelly traveled a lot. The Hobgoods traveled a lot, right? They did, but I think that their roots were here. And I saw CJ not too long ago at one of his film premieres here in St. Augustine. And I asked him that question. It was cool. He had a Q&A after the screening. And I actually asked CJ that question. I was like, total little Grom in the back. I got a question. And I'm like, I want to know your opinion as to why you think Floridian surfers are some of the best in the world, because they really are, right?
Yeah.
I mean, so I think that's cool. And especially coming from somewhere that is so relatively so small all the time, which can be also very harmful in other ways. But when I grew up, I competed against the boys. I was always in the boys divisions, right? So if you wanted to think in my area, late 90s, late 90s, early 2000s, I think if you wanted to be a competitive professional surfer as a female, you better get your ass in the boys heats, you know, and see what it's all about and win those heats, you know? So then if you're winning the boys heats, then you know you're doing well. And I think that helped me a lot. And very, very nostalgic for the ESA.
Me
and
too.
Yeah, and all those double points contests and peanut butter jelly and reeking of urine by the end of the day, and you're running around your wetsuit.
That's the best.
That's the best, you know? And I just have such killer memories from that. And I still have some of the best friends, childhood friends, or to this day. And every time you see that person, you always remind yourself, like you and me, right? So
Totally.
Same thing. So
yeah.
To me, that perspective, Karina, sounds like it would have slipstreamed quite well into the Gold Coast scene.
Yeah.
So when you went to Australia at those times,
Yeah.
that was where you were going, wasn't it?
It was.
To the Goldie?
Yeah.
Yeah.
My brothers had gone there in the 80s and just fell in love, as you do. And then my oldest brother, Eric, took me there in 98. He's like, listen, you got to see these points. You got to see these waves. And it was funny. I think in 90, Stephanie and I still talk about this to this day. Because in 98, when I first showed up there in 99, I don't think Snapper was a wave. It wasn't, right?
No,
Yeah.
no, the sand pumping hadn't started
Right.
yet.
There was no wave up there.
Yeah.
So we only surfed Rainbow, and Greenmount was like tits. I mean, Greenmount was like the jam, right? And then that was so great. Like those are such happy times. Like, I still remember, like, you had like a little Nokia, you played Snake all day. Like you go in like the Telstra phone booth, and you remember you could dial the number and the other person would pick up. It could be like 2 seconds surf, and then you call it, it's good. Like, bye. But no, going to Australia at 9, 10, that was insane. And I showed up there like, you know, a full American girl, spanoed nose to tail, and was very, you know, ratted on because of that, right? As the Australians love to rat on the Americans. And got quickly into the Rusty Grand Fest in Lennox, did that event. And then Steph and I quickly became friends, and she was in that event, one of the very few events that I ever beat her in. And that, it was funny. I remember she was wearing this like purple quickie spring suit, like her dad got from like a yard sale, and this aluminum foil surfboard. Like it literally had like aluminium foil, like fiberglass to the deck. I'm like, what in the world? Who is this fuzzy blonde chick? Right? This wearing huge blue. But I even at 10, I think I was just talking to someone about this the other day. I was like, even at like 10 years old, I was able to comprehend that person has something really special. And it's cool, like when you're a youth and able to see that, right?
Yeah, see the spark.
Yeah, but going to Australia that young and running around all those point breaks, man, what a magical country.
I wasn't even surfing yet. I didn't start surfing, I think, until 2000.
It was so awesome. I mean, I treasure those days.
When you started then, so Karina was
a star.
A big deal for you.
Karina was a big deal. Yeah.
10 and a star.
Yeah. And I know this because of Blue Crush. The original Blue Crush.
Yeah.
There's a sequence
Oh, yes.
with you and Steph. Maybe even wearing that same spring suit that you're talking about. You're both tiny little bleach blonde haired grommets, and I'm looking at this little girl from Florida who's surfing these incredible crystalline waves on the Gold Coast, just going, oh my gosh, that is possible. Holy moly.
Oh my gosh, that's so cool.
So I was fully looking up to you. What happened next? So you're a 10-year-old surfing, traveling the world, sponsored at a time when surfing was really blossoming into this more mainstream, lucrative kind of career path. What was that like?
It was interesting.
I guess you didn't know any. You probably didn't know any different, really.
Yeah, no, I didn't. I didn't really know any different. I mean, I knew that I hated competing in the beginning, and I don't like to use the word hate too much, but I really did hate it. I despised it. I'd lock myself in the room. I didn't want to have anything to do with it. Yeah, so that's interesting. But my brother was a very big push for me, and I have learned as I've gotten older, and I've seen now younger kids coming up within the professional surfing realm. I think that it's a very necessary balance to have there. You know, if you see potential in a young kid, I think it's wonderful to give them the gift of quote unquote sport or music or right. And I think that's awesome to be able to carve a path for a young kid. But I think it can be a bit dangerous if you bring in so many do's and don'ts and, you know, you must sticker your board like this. And, you know, so, you know, I was making a considerable amount of money at the time, you know, when I was 12 years old. You know, Lisa certainly broke ground for women surfers. But I think that, you know, for myself, when I came through and started acquiring endorsements and paychecks, I was making a fair amount of money for the time.
I think you were probably, you and Steph, that generation, you were the first young girls to be making a living from sponsored surfing.
Big time.
That hadn't ever happened before.
No, big time. Yeah.
And that was Board Shorts, Roxy, Lisa Anderson. And really, and I bring this up all the time because I think it's so important and so underappreciated in the timeline of surfing, that it was women surfing and Board Shorts and Roxy that floated the surf industry, especially professional surfing, especially professional men's surfing. Yeah. A lot of those prize purses didn't come from the men's side of brands selling product. It came from the booming women's side.
100%. Yeah. I mean, with women being the main consumers for sure within shopping, right? So, but no, absolutely.
It makes me think about the high performance centers and the heavily choreographed early lives of talented young surfers these days, and that balance that you're just mentioning, and that you and probably your maybe some kids just after you are probably the first generation of having that kind of orbiting team around them as kids. Totally. And what dangers are in that experience, and that you can lose the joy, the therapy, the coping mechanism that surfing is. Absolutely. When it's layered upon by sponsors, commodities, money, careers, and all these layers. Absolutely. And I think you see it in Australia right now. We have a bit of I'm just interested to hear your thoughts about this, because in Australia right now there's certainly a lack of interest in youth, like in young surfers these days, with the tour and contests, because I think from my generation and younger, so like the Dion Agiuses and Creeds and Craig Andersons and different crew in Australia, there's a lot of us who have been very talented but not competitive and have managed to avoid getting a 9-to-5 job. Totally. But not go into the contest world. And then there's these other kids who got sort of shepherded into high performance centers and sort of complicating the surfing experience as a young teenager through competitions and career and all that, who just burned out and just, unless you're winning, you're nowhere to be seen kind of deal. Like, it's a very cut and dry world, whereas the more expressionistic, whatever you want to call it, free surfing world is different. There's a lot more open doors. Interesting. Rather than just that one that leads to the top of the podium for contests. And so I feel like we're in new territory, like we're in new terrain with this, and that, you know, you see I guess the ramifications of that, you know, like, it's a pretty cutthroat world. There's very few people who do get to that level where you're making money and supporting yourself and your family or whatever and getting to the top of the podium. but there is a long wake of kids behind those people who don't quite fit the mold, you know, and it's just good to discuss it because these things typically don't get discussed in a magazine or certain spots with these big companies. So it makes me just wonder, like, how was that experience for you? Because you didn't have any other options at that time. If you wanted to be sponsored, you had to do the competitions.
Totally.
And that's what you were doing.
Right.
But you hated it.
Right.
So can you walk us through that? Like, how did you then get through all of that?
And did it dampen, did it complicate your relationship with surfing?
Oh yeah. I'm not here to lie or sugarcoat anything, right? I mean, I think that's an incredible point you bring up, Dave. I think that's an amazing juxtaposition to be able to look at that and to analyze that. And I think it's really interesting because I think it all falls back to that awesome question, is surfing a sport? You know, so I think that is really the catalyst of that topic, because I would be lying to you if I told you that every time I went surfing, I wasn't thinking about performing and being the best. And that's so interesting to be able to like break down that barrier within going surfing and saying, you know, cool it. Like, you don't have to always be, pushing yourself or doing better than what you did or get down on yourself because you didn't do this. And that's because I was a competitive surfer. You know, it really is. I mean, I was ingrained, you know, to be a winner, you know, and my husband, David, and I were talking about this the other day because he's like, oh, well, you know, we were talking about an up and coming girl and, you know, he was saying, well, you know, maybe she's not going to be world champion or maybe she's not going to be the best, but maybe she can make a living out of professional surfing and just have a nice life. And I got all heated and pumped up. And I was like, well, that's not how you're going to make tour. And you get on tour to win. And if you're not, and I'm like, whoa, easy there. Like, holy crap. Right. Like, I got all right. But that is.
Was that you saying easy there? Holy crap.
No.
Or was that?
No, I was all fired up.
No, you were fired up. But was there a part of you that was also saying, whoa, where did that come from?
After. Yeah, of course. Because I wasn't wrong in the situation. No, I was right. I totally had a valid point at the time. And no, poor David's over there like, whoa. Dude, like,
what kind of worms did I just
chill out. Like, but I am that, you know, I guess, and I'm not that competitive anymore. And I think that was a big downfall for me towards the end of my career. It's like, I couldn't snake anybody anymore. I just couldn't back paddle anybody anymore. I couldn't be the bitch that you need to be. And I always admired the guys, as well, at least when I was within competitive surfing heavily, was that the guys could just go out there and be ruthless against each other and then come and like high five each other on the beach. Like, yeah, no worries. But it was so hard. Women are so emotional and, you know, they carry all this shit with them, right? And it's like, you come back into the beach after just beating your friend who's literally like paying, you know, paycheck to paycheck. And then you got to go bunk up with them in the same hotel or room or wherever you're at in Newcastle, you know, like, so it was so hard to like juggle all that for me. And so now I admire people now to be able to see it as like, this is my job. And like you said, they have their team orbiting around them, that they're able to, you know, stay, not everybody by any means, but like they're at least, let's call the top 10 are able to like have a network around them where they're just able to move from point A to point B and not have to be affected by anybody else's emotions. But back when I was on tour, everyone was all jumbled mess, right? But it was fun. But yes, I think that to get back to your point, I think it is very interesting to be able to look at, you know, the competitive aspect and then the free surfing aspect. And nobody did that better than you did, as far as like carving the path for people to be able to live the pure and raw life of surfing and being this incredible waterman, waterwoman. And I think, yeah, absolutely. You were a huge inspiration for me, especially towards my later years with the competitive surfing, because maybe I don't need to do this. Maybe I don't need to just milk it for the 0.5, right? But like, but then at the same time, it afforded me so many wonderful things as well. And you know, the reason why I went to Taiji with you was because of competitive surfing. So I think it's important to give everything the respect and the credit that it deserves instead of just bashing it all the time. And it'd be wrong for me to say that, but yes, I think that I almost need like a reawakening within myself through surfing, in the sense that just like break it down and actually just become fully present in the moment for what you're doing as an art form and as just painting a canvas instead of just being so concerned about performance. And I find that topic really interesting. And it's a sport, it's a lifestyle, it's a sport, it's a lifestyle. And I am certainly more on it's a lifestyle, than it being a sport, even though I am watching the events and I'm heavily invested and interested, but I'm conflicted, right?
Yeah. And surfing's always been both.
Yeah.
If we look back to Polynesia, surfing was competitive.
Right.
It was a competitive sport.
Yeah.
And it was also courtship. It was dating. It was romance.
Yeah.
It was playing in the shorey.
Yeah.
It was all of it. So
it's so cool.
This complexity is inherent in the surfing experience.
Is it? Yeah.
But I think it's really interesting, to think about the shadows that come along with the dream of being a professional surfer.
Apologies for interrupting the conversation, but we'd like to take a moment to recognize the generous folks who help make this podcast possible. Sunbutter Skincare is committed to protecting people and the planet. They make vegan, reef-safe SPF 50 sunscreen packaged in reusable and recyclable tins. They're also the world's first certified palm oil-free sunscreen brand. Check out sunbutter.com.au to learn more about their skin and ocean-friendly lines of sunscreen, surf zinc, and skincare. Thanks also to Gary McNeil Concepts, who make cosmic surfboards for cosmic people. Gaz's boards combine recycled and plant-based materials that are built to last without sacrificing performance. To learn more, head to GaryMcNeilConcepts.com.
Absolutely.
And especially too with what you were just saying then, Karina, I think it's really interesting to talk about how to unravel what's appropriate for you as you get older and your life and your locations change. So it's like, in your 20s when you got lots of fire in your belly and you're wanting to really test your physical capabilities in the world and where you fit in comparison to others and whatnot. And that's all the adventures you were just talking about, like sharing hotel rooms around the world with all your friends and doing that, we're doing that all day. You party harder than that person. You can get up earlier and go surfing more. And it's
more hungover.
That was the deal. But then you turn 30 or 40, whatever the age is, where you slip out of that
100%.
type of living. Yeah. And then you realize, that competitive mindset that sort of has to become automated in you for you to succeed in the contest world. Like you have to automatically go paddle that spot, make sure you've capitalized on any weakness of your opponent or whatever it is. Like all of that isn't appropriate anymore. And so what is interesting to me is what you're talking about is how you unravel from that and thrive and enjoy surfing the most and have a wonderful life and be in the moment, like you're saying, and fully appreciative rather than being railroaded by these, lessons and these practices that you really had to employ deeply in your 20s. And that's interesting because, a lot of people don't talk about how in surfing most world champions are addicts of some sort or have had radical addiction troubles in their life or have had incredible ups and downs or especially the plunge after competitive surfing. What is surfing anymore if it's not winning and losing and quantifiable?
To that point, most pro surfers, when they're transitioning out of their glorious, adventurous days of traveling around the world, being completely living, as you said, very unconventionally, have a major fall from grace moment and lots of professional surfers have a really difficult time readjusting to what most people call normal life. How was that for you? Can you talk us through that transition when you started questioning being on tour and whether or not that was how you wanted to be spending your time?
Yeah, absolutely. I know exactly when that was. I had a blast. Don't get me wrong. I had a lot of fun. I had too much fun. My nickname was Corona Petroni for a reason. Okay? There was a minute there that I was like Party on, Wayne. Life on tour is great, and I will lead the pack. So, okay, and it was so cool. Like on that point, like, did you see the clip that was posted of everyone going ham in G-Land? No, like after the G-Land event, like all the pro surfers was like, well, no, actually during the event, during the waiting period, excuse me. No, the event was certainly not over. And they were just in this lapse waiting period, all stuck at G-Land. And everybody just flipped the lid and had like this spontaneous, hellacious party.
Awesome.
And everyone just went AWOL. And it was so good to see. It was so refreshing.
Yeah.
Right? It was just like, get that punk rock and roll back into surfing. And like, it just made me so happy. It made so many people so happy because you're like, it's not all about kettlebells and, pumping out the 6.25, right? It was just like, thank God they're still human, right? Like they still can party. And it's funny because I don't even party anymore. I can't even remember the last time I was hungover. And I would like be rolling out of Joe Cool's in Durban to surf my heat. And like be proud of it. Like, who am I? And now I'm like completely the other way. They barely touch booze and like train my ass off. And like, it's just funny to come full circle. But as far as like, my career kind of coming to a close, I learned so much. And if you want to be in whatever you do in your life, protect yourself and protect your assets, because there will be someone, no matter how much they love you, that will take advantage of you. And that is my biggest concern for all these youths that are coming up. And I don't care if it's your mom or if it's your dad or if it's your brother, it's your sister. And I am a bit polarized because I got burned so bad by a family member that I feel the very necessary urge to speak about being protected, right? So when you're all gallivanting around the planet, having a blast, right, as a minor, you need to make sure that you're being protected. And towards the end of my career, I was making $250,000 plus. I was making an excessive amount of money, especially for the time, right? And I just banked on people in my quote unquote corner had my back and were taking care of the finances that were coming in and the assets that were that I was earning at the time, right? Yeah. And that wasn't the case, right? So I don't need to like dive into it and paint this horrible picture. I got burned really bad. I lost everything that I had. So and that puts it into perspective once again, going back to your point as far as like being a competitive athlete or being this free surfer, right? In this free spirit. It was a job and I was making money and I was dragging massive board bags all around the planet with me, right? So I was legitimately trying to be the best and to do my best and making a really great income. And I just thought that something should have come from that. Something, a house.
You worked hard. You
right?
played hard, but you also worked hard.
Right.
Yeah.
And I started when I was 9, right? And then it kind of came viciously crashing down by the time I was 21.
Wow, 21.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I lived such a full life between 9 and 21. Like, I'm so blessed. But all the experiences were worth all the tragedy. I would never, ever trade it for the world. But I sit here today as after having a 13, 14 year career in something, right? Whether you're a lawyer or a doctor, whatever. I don't care who you are. If you have a 14-year career in something, you should have a cinder block hut to sleep in, right? So, and I don't. So I think that, now, of course, I'm different, married, new life, for sure. But I think if you're an independent woman for such a long period of time and you've stood on your own ground for so long, it means a lot to you to be able to have something. I did this, right?
Yeah. Yeah, something to show for your hard work.
Totally.
Right.
Of course.
And I think that I'm very I'm very pro paperwork in that sense. If you are going to go down that road and if you're going to have that orbit of people around you that are going to be helping you engage in this prolific career, just make sure that you're protected and make sure that when you're 40, you got somewhere to sleep and you know what, you're kind of set up. And I admire the parents and the relatives that did that for my peers, you know? So, but it's okay. It's not like, woe is me. It's all right. Like, but you learn from your experiences. And I don't think it's like, it's important to talk about that shit. You have to help other people.
I had no idea that you'd been through that. So I'm really sorry to hear that.
Yeah,
And,
no,
but it's really, like you said, it's super important to talk about that.
Yeah.
What a betrayal.
Yeah.
I mean, almost everyone knows that experience of being betrayed by someone you love and trust.
Yeah.
This was extreme.
Yeah. Yeah. I just, just misjudgment, miscalculation, misguidance. I mean,
And being young and naive, how could you ever even imagine that
no,
someone close to you would take advantage?
right. And that can only, and that will only spill over into how you look at things. Right. So, I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's an experience. Everybody has one. And that was mine towards the end of my career.
And so what did you lean on then? So we're talking about that transition.
Yeah.
So what did you lean on when you don't have that structure of touring the world and having certain dates where you've got to be certain places and you're with girlfriends that you know you're going to have a great time here and a great time there? Like when that goes, what did you lean on next? Is that when we connected up in Japan and things like that were happening in your world? 2008?
No. That would have been like was that 2008?
Yeah.
Oh wow, you have a good memory. That was towards the end. Yeah, it was a hair before.
So were you starting to cultivate other things? You're
Absolutely.
like, okay, that's fading. I'm going to start.
Sure.
Yeah.
And I always wanted to work with non-endemic brands, you know, and not to say that the OPS and that, well, it was a bit non-endemic, right?
Yeah.
I mean, as far as like branching out and doing other alternative
100%.
things, right? But I did a really cool fashion collaboration with Rachel Roy out of New York City. But, you know, Vans wasn't happy with that at the time because I think, you know, they weren't too pleased with me, you know, kind of diving into fashion at the same time of being endorsed by Vans. And I understand that and I appreciate that. They were my main sponsor from head to toe at the time. But it was cool. I was very adamant on branching out. And I always had that. You know, I was like, I could be sponsored by Prada, right? And I wanted to see that within surfing as far as just excelling it and making it cool and high end and But like now you see athletes that are sponsored by Breitling and Audi and, you know, so I think that's cool. And you're elevating the sport. But once again, I think that what I leaned on towards the end was, my dad died at the same time. So like as soon as like my career ended and the finances crashed, my dad died. So that was like,
wow.
Yeah, it was just a big shitstorm. But then through serendipity, I met David. Yeah. So I went on a very spontaneous trip to the Bahamas, 3 nights. Let's go. Here we go. Met David, and then my life changed forever, which was amazing. Yeah, it was really cool. So
was it love at first sight?
No, I mean, not for me. I was like, because him and I, we obviously live different lives. I mean, he's a badass, man. That guy can do anything. I swear to God, I've never met a more capable person. But like I was, you know, gallivanting all around the world, board bags, sailor in different port, like, woo, you know, and then I show up and he's like, oh my God, who is this crazy chick? But I was all friends. Like there was no funny business in the 3 days there. I was like, no, it was all buddy, surfing, sailing, flying. But then, definitely after like the third day, little sparks flew.
Oh.
Yeah. And then he was the first guy that ever bought me a plane ticket to come back and visit him. I went to Panama with my brothers on like a really like a little reunion trip, which was nice. And then David and I stayed in contact over that month. And then when I came back to Florida, he bought me a ticket to come back. And then that was in the end of 2009.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. It's the longest relationship I ever had. We're still running.
That's when I feel like we would have run into each other.
Yep.
You all
100%. 2009 was totally the time because when Lauren and I both sort of became single at the same time, and when I reached out to her after a few years after we'd first met in Byron Bay, and sparks flew, but we were with people at the time.
Yeah.
When I reached out to her, she was with you.
Well,
I emailed you and you said
there was a screening of a surf film in the surf station parking lot, and I was getting ready to go to Canada to visit my ex to like have closure.
Oh, wow.
And it was like the night before, and I ran into you.
Oh my gosh.
We were sitting on the back of a truck of some kind watching surf films.
As you do.
Yeah. And I was so stoked to see you. And you told me about how you'd been in Japan with Dave. And a couple of days later, Dave sent me an email and touched base again after we hadn't spoken for years. And then when I got to Montreal in Canada, I opened up the paper and there was a review of The Cove. And it was playing in town, like one of the first screenings probably. It was in autumn of 2009.
Mm-hmm.
And so I went and saw it, and then wrote Dave back and told him about how I'd seen it and how I'd seen you, and you told me you were there. And it was
That's
just
so
all
cool.
of this.
6 degrees of separation.
Yeah, full synchronistic.
like a crazy
moment.
little flurry when
love
we
that.
live on opposite sides of the planet, don't have anyone else that we collectively know.
Isn't that so cool?
You know, and it was just a timing
love
thing.
that.
I was like,
That's so cool.
And
Right.
then we just continued
Aw.
this beautiful, very cheesy but prolific pen pal ship for months until I ended up going back to
Aw.
Australia.
No, you
In
surf pretty.
2010.
No, you surf pretty.
No, for the record, I said, I think you're absolutely gorgeous.
Oh.
And Lauren wrote back, I think you surf pretty. Let it be
Not my-
known,
not my
listeners.
finest
Let it be
hour.
known.
Not my finest hour. Sometimes words fail, okay?
That's so awesome. I hope that gets printed somewhere on a
She
t-shirt.
still says it all the time. If I come in from the surf and I might have got a particularly nice wave,
Yeah.
she would say, I still think you surf pretty.
It's true.
And it means
I
a lot.
wasn't wrong.
It's not. She's not wrong.
Yeah, it means a lot.
Shit, man. You have a great memory. I didn't remember that. But
Yeah, it was. Well, for you, it would have been a random encounter with another random, like, fangirl.
no.
Me.
Stop.
But for me, I was like, whoa, it was just all of these, like, connective tissue moments that led me back to Dave.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
so cool.
Yeah,
That's
really
awesome.
sweet. You, I know, and you've spoken about how you've had all these great adventures.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us about a highlight surf trip moment, an unforgettable wave or swell or experience that you'll just carry with you forever?
I mean, Japan was pretty incredible. I mean, working on the Cove.
How did you come to be involved?
I really think that was greatly thanks to my brother for lining that up for me through the Oceanic Preservation Society. Dave came in on it with, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you came in on it with more the Sea Shepherd side of it, right?
Yeah.
And I came in more on the OPS side, and not necessarily by choice. I think that's just how the relationships had initially formed, and I got invited onto that trip. But that was pretty life-changing. That was incredible. That was an amazing experience.
Why?
I think mainly because I had never done anything like that before. I had never engaged in anything that raw and that real. And I certainly had not done anywhere near as much as the environmental work or the conservationist work that you had done leading up to that point. So it was a very new ground for me.
It was still a radical space to be overtly, doing direct action as a professional surfer. It wasn't mainstream like it is now.
No, certainly not.
Yeah, it was radical.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I hope that I maybe played an, integrated role in making that happen for people to come. Right.
Yeah.
So, but that was a extraordinary experience. I learned a lot. I found it to be incredibly awakening and intense. And I'm very grateful that I was a part of it in just a very, very small way. But yeah, that was cool. It's amazing.
I always think about your professional surfing career in terms of experimentation and how you were experimenting, surfing at the highest level, doing these fashion collaborations, working with non-endemic brands. And then also, and I wanted to ask you about this, and maybe you don't want to talk about it, but I feel like you were one of the earlier women to experiment with a sexier image.
Totally.
And I was just so curious to talk about what led to that decision, because there was a real proliferation of sexier, like, I mean, we can talk about whether it felt empowered or objectifying for you personally, and how women's surf culture was really built around that for a period in time.
Yeah. No, you ask away. I mean, I did FHM at a really young age.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think FHM even exists anymore, but it was like...
Oh, that's right. I remember
It's a men's magazine.
It's a men's magazine, yeah. Maxim. Well, it's similar to Maxim. And in South Beach with Daisy Shane Goodwin and Claudia... Oh, she's going to hate me. Claudia Congalves, Brazilian girl. The three of us did that shoot. And I was something. But yeah, no, I definitely dove into the whole sex appeal side of female surfing and certainly used that to my advantage of being tall and blonde. But I was thick too. I mean, I was a big, strong.
You just looked like an
wrestler.
Amazonian, amazing, Grecian goddess.
Yeah, but no, I definitely, I don't know all that.
That's how you appeared to all of us.
I mean, my hairstyles were changing one day I looked like Splash, and the next day I was like, Dykes on Bikes with like this super short haircut, right? So I'm like, whoa, like it was you never knew what you were going to get. But I had extensions all the time, and I was doing all these crazy fashion shoots and sexy shoots and wearing these tiny bikinis. And I still have some of those bikinis to this day. I'm like, what on earth were you thinking? I can't believe someone let me walk out of the house wearing that.
Were you still a minor at that point? And was this like your family negotiating stuff?
Yes.
Just to get you opportunities?
Yes. Yeah.
Well, that's what it comes down to, isn't it? It's because of a choice of at that stage, unless you were the winningest female surfer, there was nothing else.
No.
There were no other options. No. In the men's world, it was only I was one of the first crew who never succeeded in competition.
Right.
And then became a free surfer. Yeah. I just was always a, quote unquote free surfer.
Right.
Before that, there was none of those opportunities. So it was right on that edge at that time where there was enough to go around to support.
Women surfing is only there now.
Yeah.
There are only now women who are surfing non-competitively, making a living.
As free surfers, right.
Yeah, and only just. So that's the thing is the context of that time is you were doing that, but if you wanted to avoid going to a frickin' desk monkey life, so what? You wear a bikini and you go take the pictures and whatever. You're keeping that ball rolling. Is that where your head was at, or was it different?
I mean, I guess I was just being led by the shepherd at the time. But I mean, I feel that even to this day, it's cutthroat to be a woman in professional sport. I'm sorry, but they got to sell shit. It's marketing at the end of the day. I mean, these are people in suits working the monkey jobs, right? That are trying to sell product and push product. And I know that it sounds brutal, but it's if you don't have the looks, you're not going to sell the product. That's what it comes down to. And it's now just changing, right? It's so nice and reassuring to see that. But when I can only speak from my perspective. And when I was a teenager or even a young teen up until the late teen, it was sex that sold, right? And I was fortunate enough to have good enough looks and good enough talent, and I could speak on camera. So I had a little bit of a triple threat package at the time that I certainly worked and used to my advantage. But it came crashing down, and it's not, I can't blame other people entirely for the reason why my career crashed. You have to take responsibility of your own actions in order to be able to make sense of anything. So, it was certainly came down to me. I started trying, I wasn't trying as hard. I wasn't training as hard. I was maybe dabbling in things that were superfluous than what I should have been applying myself to, like sex appeal, right? And but
that was the most lucrative angle you could take as a female surfer at the time.
100%.
I mean, I feel like Alana Blanchard really came to personify that whole era. She was the highest paid female surfer for at least a number of years. Yeah.
And her ass is her asset.
Well, she made it work. She,
I don't know whether to praise her or punish her. I mean, it's at the end of the day, it's, you choose your path and that's, you know, that's what you've chosen. It's not
a lot
to
of
say
people ask me about this though. Like a lot of people who are critical of me being critical of the way the surf industry was, say, well, these are young women who are choosing to do this, to use their bodies to make money. And that's fair. And that's understandable when there is a fair and real choice to be made. Right. But the fact is that nudity or, you know, bearing as much as possible. Provocativeness was the most lucrative thing you could do, more lucrative than being 100%, on tour. Yeah. And so that's not a real choice. No. That is swaying, you know, stacking the cards in one particular direction, encouraging female surfers to value, in some cases, their looks, their bodies, their sex appeal more than their competitive ability. Yeah. Their surfing ability.
Yeah. I mean, it was a crazy time. I mean, for me, for sure, I did a lot of very, you know, edgy things, especially for the time. But I can't bash myself or others or whoever, you know, helped me get into the situation at the time, because it's molded me to who I am today. Right. So I'm an imperfect person that is just, you know, and that was my experience. Right. So, I'm not, I don't know. It's hard now being older to be able to look at young girls coming up. I look at it very differently. It was
in what way? How do you see it differently?
Certainly more motherly, right? Like wanting to be a bit more protective, right? Because
did you feel like you had people protecting you?
I mean, yes and no. Yes and no. Looking back, I guess when you're young, it's so beautiful. You're so innocent, right? So. You don't really know what's taking place around you, but that's a tough one, especially for like all the young girls coming up. But I find there's a lot more modesty now within obviously speaking about surfing, within women's surfing. I think that everything has become much more modest and far more about your skills and ability. Yeah.
It feels
and
healthier.
Your voice.
Yeah. It feels healthier. There's a spectrum of acceptability now that ranges from like the Carissa Moores wearing boardies, just focusing on performance, to the whoever the extreme provocative surfers are. Right. And that feels healthy when there's options. You could be a young girl growing up
or people like Leah Dawson. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a nice wide range now. I think is very beautiful, and that's cool. Yeah. It goes to show that because before, it wasn't an option for women to be free surfers. It was not. It was that's so interesting. I would have loved to have been a female Dave Rostovich who wouldn't have loved to do that.
Well, I think you still could be.
Well, thank you. That was very kind. But I think that it was not even an option for women at the time. Yeah. It was so interesting because women are the largest consumers, right? Which were, like you were saying in the beginning, like fronting Quicksilver's bills, but they were using models to endorse their product because the female athlete wasn't attractive enough to endorse the product. So, but then, you know, within surf, it's like, you gotta be core, bro, like core. I'm like, no, nobody's core, you know, like at the end of the day, nobody's core. If you're running a business, you're running a business, right? Yeah. So in my scenario and in my years within professional surfing, there wasn't even an option for me to be a free surfer, which seems like such a oxymoron. Yeah. You would have almost thought the opposite because women are so fun and free and beautiful and out there, like watching you surf today, cross-stepping, and it was like watching music. And it was like, but I'm attracted to that. You know, am I attracted to like raw and foamy at the mouth and like decimate this chick in blue? Like, you know, like it's pretty interesting when you think about it like that, right? Totally. Yeah. So, but just now you're starting to see like, well, no, I mean, Cassia Medor and Leah Dawson, of course, those girls have been around a long time, but now they're really like blossomed into these careers, which I think is so cool. It's come full circle and it's cool to see that. Like, it's nice to see that women have a bit more options as far as what they want to do, right?
Yeah, I think so too. Feels a lot healthier. Yeah. And I asked about the sexy experimentation, not at all because I see it in a negative light, because that's often misinterpreted. I just think the the negativity was about the culture that didn't allow for there to be different ways of being a female surfer.
Absolutely.
Like, that was the problem.
Yeah. Oh, no.
And I think it's come a long way.
Yeah. And I take absolutely no offense to that question whatsoever. I think it's an interesting topic.
So when we were in Japan, so we were in Japan in 28 or whatever it was, 2008-ish. And when the second time that we went back to the Cove to try to, shine a light on what was happening there and just get people talking about something that was not spoken about at that time.
Right.
We went back with a few people who weren't water people, but you and I are.
Yeah.
And I remember that feeling of the appreciation of having, someone with skill, water skills, right?
Can you set this up?
and-
Maybe people who are listening are unaware of Taiji or the Cove. Can you set it up for us a little bit?
Oh,
Well, they should be.
Yeah, you'd think they would. Well, basically, I was traveling around the world, one trip after the other for a few years at that point, doing work on dolphin and whale issues around the world where surfing communities butted up against these issues. So there are places where outside fishing fleets would come, like Chile, for example, and there was fishing fleets throughout the Pacific coming from Asia that would go all the way down to Chile and take whales from their waters. And so we would go to Chile and make sure that the surfing communities and different people there knew about that and what they could do to stop that from happening.
So awesome.
And so that was what I was doing at that time. And I was getting pretty burnt out, but I was making a lot of great new friendships and contacts in that world. And one of those was Louis Sahoyas and the OPS crew and Charles and all that mob. And we met at a IWC.
We had Louis on the podcast.
Yeah, Louis was on last year.
Wow,
Yeah,
that's awesome.
it was great. It was really great.
Wow, that's
great.
so
It was a
cool.
really good chat. You'll get a kick out of it. It's pretty classic. But at that stage, I met Louis and the crew in Alaska at this International Whaling Commission meeting.
Sounds like a band.
And I talked to them about my plan to go to Japan and that the surfing world there were into everything that I was up to at that time.
Sure.
They loved the whole hippie surfer deal. And so I was like, okay, well, there's this strange thing happening where I know more about what's going on in your coastal waters with these very inhumane practices by some of your fishermen than you guys do. So I want to get that information to you, meaning to the surfers of Japan, so that they at least know about it and then perhaps be able to do something about it themselves because it's their country, their culture. So when I told Louis that, he's like, well, in hushed voice, he's like, well, we've been going there the last few years and we've been documenting all of that and we're kind of finished, but we'll go back if you're going to bring a bunch of crew there because Rick O'Barry is like hanging on by a thread with the whole deal and he would love to feel like the cavalry are coming in was Louis' words. He's like, he would love to feel that his work is not just on his shoulders, but other people are going to pick it up. So it was this amazing meeting and I told him a few other stories about where I was coming from and he just got so pumped. And so that's when we all met up and you and I and the crew in Japan. And so the idea was to go out and do a paddle out. At that stage, now paddle outs, especially in Australia, are very common and they're commonly used for social or environmental issues. So like big oil just came to Australia to do massive exploration for oil along our coast. And so 60,000 people paddled out in circles around Australia. But at that time, it wasn't happening. And my idea was that in Japan, it's a very ritualistic culture, a lot of ceremony and whatnot. We would go to that place where so many dolphins and whales are killed in a very inhumane way. And we would perform what surfers do all around the world, which is the circle to say goodbye to your fellow surfer.
Absolutely.
And that's that. And so my idea was to do that and to do it right there at ground zero where that's happening. And then when we all connected up in Japan, we went and did that. And I was in Japan for a few weeks before that doing different surfing things. And the fishermen in that area thought that myself and other Sea Shepherd-related people were going to blow up their boats and wreak havoc in their town, in their port. And so they didn't do any drives of the cetaceans during that time. We went and did the first paddle out, which was all very fluffy and nice and everything. And then as soon as we left that night, the fishermen went out and did a drive and brought some animals in, killed some so that the rest of the pod would stay, and put the nets up. And that's when we all got the call that they'd done that. The bay was full of blood. And so that was when, at midnight we decided we're going back. We're not going to take the 30-odd people that we'd organised with the first one. We'd just do a small group.
Right.
And that's what Karina and I and a handful of others were a part of. So, Lauren, you were asking to set the scene with this. And that's when we went back, and that's when I had a deep appreciation for knowing that we got water skills, and the rest is history. That it all went out like crazy around the world after that.
Yeah.
The reason I wanted to bring that up was that was a moment where we could use something as seemingly abstract as just being good surfers for something useful in the world.
Absolutely.
And I was wondering how you felt about that, and perhaps other times in your life where surfing and a relationship with the ocean has been useful and meaningful in a way for you. So perhaps, when your father passed away, or, your mum's going through a journey right now, like, can you give us and people listening an insight into, perhaps any moments or thoughts around how a water-centric life or a relationship with the ocean is useful and meaningful for you?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in reference to the project that we worked on together in Taiji, I only wish now, just being older and a little bit wiser, that I had used my professional surfing platform to engage in more projects like that, because that is really what prevails and on for decades to come. So I don't even think that I was aware of how monumental and pivotal that was for me at the time, to be able just to be affiliated with something like that on such a scratching the surface side, especially in comparison to how heavily invested you were in educating yourself and knowing what was at stake there. So I really wish I had a bit more time, or had a bit more focus towards projects like that, because it was unbelievably gratifying to be a part of something like that. It was just so eye-opening. And through that, as far as how the ocean is able to carry you through situations, I think it was just cool to see, in the scene in the film, that you and I are in that circle, just kind of keeping everything together while everyone was kind of
coming unglued,
losing it, right?
Totally.
I mean, there was tons of blood in the water. Dave and I are quite composed. I was wearing, I don't know if you guys were wearing a lipstick cam.
Yeah, we both had them.
Yeah, and we were like the only ones that were like, I was actually afraid I was going to drown, or go faint, or so. Yeah. And that was just because that we had the experience of growing up in the ocean, and I think that just in itself is so cool, to be able to understand, to just remain calm and know that you're in the presence of something far, far greater, especially through utter calamity, which that was utter calamity. So absolutely. I mean, the ocean gives you so much serenity and peace. Just like it's so funny, even if I live a couple streets away from it, I probably have to go every day just to make sure it's there. It's like having your therapist in arm's reach. Like, are you still there? Okay, you're still there. Okay. No, move.
Still answering the phone.
Yeah,
when you call.
Okay, I'll be back. Yeah. But no, it provides me with so much serenity and peace, and just it's water, just the water just around you is just, it's subliminal. And I think that you don't even realize how heavy it's contributing to your subconscious, affecting you in such a positive internal way. It's magical. Like it's truly magical. I'm so blessed to be a part of that. Like, I think that that's such a, I speak to so many different couples or people that have chosen different people, and some people have issues within their relationship. I'm like, well, what brings you together? What is that? Is it art? Is it music? Is it food? Is it, you have to have, I really feel that helps so much. It may not be like that for everyone, but I feel that like it's helped David and I so much just to have the ocean as the bond. It always brings you back. Like maybe it's the mountains, maybe it's the rivers, maybe it's airplanes. But I feel that it just helps so much, especially if it's like fire, earth, water, if it's one of the main forces that kind of just like brings you back together and forms that bond, because you can always find serenity within that, like, and make sense of life through that.
Yeah. And newness.
And newness.
I find there's something about being a couple and having something outside of yourselves that bonds you.
Totally.
The spontaneity of the ocean, the ability to have this outlet for play, to play together. That's absolutely crucial. And then also to be able to have something completely unexpected happen in the ocean, like almost drowning in the shore break in France and having to be rescued by your significant other.
Sounds like an amazing story.
Just, it just makes life more dynamic. Simply.
Big time.
Yeah. Karina, you've been in Florida for over a month now.
Uh-huh.
You were telling us about how during the COVID lockdowns, you spent 18 months in the Bahamas on the island that you had been living on for quite some time. And that was the longest stretch of time you'd ever spent in one place in your life.
Yeah, I think that was the longest time I'd ever been in one place in my entire life. Yeah.
Did that experience plant in you the desire for rooting deeper and longer in a place, or did it make you have itchy feet?
I guess a little bit of both. Yeah, a little bit of both. But I think it was it taught me so much about making the best of every situation, or trying at least to make the best of every situation, and realizing that it really comes down to you, and your excuses that are holding you back of making the best of any situation. So I think that and so many people experienced that through COVID, right? Because everyone was locked down to some measure, some far more intense than others. We were incredibly blessed of what we had freedom up the wazoo. Granted, we were, stuck in that country, but, similar to you guys as far as your experience in Australia during COVID. But I mean, it really honed in for me. Like, no, it's actually you that are creating all the excuses. You have every single resource to make the best out of this life, make the best out of the body that you have, make it as strong and as healthy and as capable as you are. So it was groundbreaking for me on a mental side, and to be able to overcome issues that I had been harboring and battling. And yeah, I mean, that's like a whole podcast genre in itself, as far as like everyone's individual experience with how did you deal with, being by yourself or for that long. But no, I mean, I think that it was a bit of both, right? Like, as far as wanting there's something about regiment and something about having your own sea salt shaker in one place for an extended period of time, which is nice and a bit comforting. But then at the same time, it's like I want to see as much as I can and try to do as much as I can while I can, right? I think time goes by unbelievably fast.
How we've been chatting, the two of us, about the struggles we've had with our parents going through their own health challenges. How does experiencing your family suffering with health give you fresh, new, or different perspective on your own well-being and how you want to use your time in the world?
Yeah, I think it has to do with gumption, really. I like that word. I just kind of learned it in the last couple of years. Gumption's important.
Can you define it? I don't really know what that word means.
It's a good word. It's a good one. You can use it.
I might latch onto it.
Gumption means like guts. Here's a perfect example. If I'm bleeding out of my leg and my calf muscle's hanging out, and you come and you stuff the muscle back in, you tape it up, you had gumption in that scenario.
Yeah, right.
You just dove right in.
Yeah, like proactive.
Yeah, you just and you didn't even let it phase you. You just got right in there and just had to deal with the issue at hand, And I don't like as far as like your parents getting older, I spent some brief time in nursing homes with my dad, and it was the most depressing, most horrible harrowing experience. And I mean, when I say brief, it was literally a few days until we got him out. And we're a very Italian, Norwegian family, very smothering. Everyone's involved, right? Everyone's got 10,000 opinions, but hey, you know what? That's what I was dealt. So that's okay. So we're good. And none of us are attorneys or doctors, but we really, I think, will go through thick and thin to help our family members if it's in a tough time, especially with our parents. And, you know, as many as the indifferences that we have and the disagreements that we've had within my professional serving business, you know, when it comes time to hone in and focus on something within your family, you know, I would say that we do a good job at that. And it taught me so much. I mean, I was 17, I was putting a condom catheter on my dad. You know, wow. That's a big thing for a 17-year-old to be able to do that, because my dad, you know, he was going to the bathroom all over himself. That's gumption, right? And to be able to like be open and talk about that and help people through their experiences. Nobody knows what you're dealing with. You know, no one knows, you know, because it's like, you're not going to stay there and like have this whole story, because someone else is probably going through just as much shit or more, right? And now, you know, it's full circle, and now I'm helping my mom go to the bathroom in the same way, right? And it's very real. It's very raw, and you're really able to see life in like full circle. But you have to remember that is life, you know, and you have to either completely face it or completely turn around and go the other way, and then probably live with a lot of, you know, other bullshit that will nag on you mentally, right? Because you didn't face it. And it's one of the hardest, most realest things that you can face, because it's your mom, you know, or your dad, or, you know, the people that brought you into this planet. So you're filled with so much guilt, and did I do enough, and do I need to do more? It's constant, but it's like, at the end of the day, if you are not happy and you're not taking care of yourself, that is actually one of the biggest form of being selfish. And I think that's such an interesting word that people misuse so much. Oh, he's so selfish. He's always doing things right. If you're partying, carrying on, and being a dumbass, yeah, absolutely. But if you're like exercising and taking care of yourself and eating healthy and being strong, you're actually helping the other people out around you. Because the day that you lose that and you start getting slack and you start getting sick and your ass is in the hospital, then everybody around you is caring for you, because you just didn't have the decency and the respect for the other people around you to take care of yourself. So it's like, you know, so I think that is so missing. No, take the time, go to the gym, go to yoga, go surfing, like do you, and take care of yourself, because I guarantee you'll be called upon. Right. And that is what I've learned so much as getting older and being able to like figure that out, or being stuck on a rock for 18 months and like, right, living in plank position for too long. It's like, so I think that within, you know, my parents for sure, like that was huge for me. And now dealing it with my mom, and being able to live through that again, like what I did, you know, similar to what I did with my dad, but understanding that it's just life. You know, you just gotta figure it out. You gotta just figure it out. And everybody has a very similar story. Just, we're all going down the same streams. Everyone's in slightly different boats.
Thanks for listening with us today. If you have a spare moment, please leave us a review or consider sharing an episode with a friend. Both help us to find the very best stories from our global community of water people. This episode was edited by Ben Alexander. The podcast soundtrack was composed by Shannon Soul Carroll, with additional tunes improvised by Dave and goofy-footed legends Neil Purchase Jr. and Christian Barker. We'll be continuing today's conversation on Instagram, where we're at Water People Podcasts.